Good morning. Well, it's a wet one. Yep, we're supposed to get up to 50 millimeters of rain. We'll see what we happen. Over the past couple of months, we've had all these big storm warnings and then nothing happens. So we'll actually see if the rain comes. November, we're traditionally wetter than normal. But who knows? We could end up having a worse rainstorm, or it could just be a drizzly day. Right now, the wind's blowing a bit. It's still dark, so we're not really going to be able to see. Nico and I went out, and he came back, and he wanted in. So, sit back, relax, and we'll get going. Okay, just have to look at the time here. Can't really see much out of these glasses, so we'll put them over here for now. Yesterday out in Abbotsford, there was a stabbing. And what ended up happening is one of the two people involved ended up passing away. Now, I think we got to get back to more of the importance that people put on dealing with people. The 50s and the 40s, there was an awful lot more where people would really note how others were feeling. And then we ended up in the me generation, and everything was about me, and the pleasure. And that's when drugs really started to take effect. And, we all start worrying about people or everyone. It's all the me generation, all about me. And I think we've really got to stop and start to take notice of other people and how they're feeling. Because right now, it's kind of like, well, you piss me off, I'm going to get a gun or a knife and I'm going to shoot you or stab you. And, I think we've got to turn this around and make it so people realize that we have to take care of one another. And they're talking about wearing the colors for Abbotsford. I'm not exactly sure who did this. I heard this story yesterday, and I think they caught two, but it would be interesting today to see how the school reacts and, how we get on with our lives. Things change, and right now I don't think this is the greatest way of change in our lives, but we have to really take notice. And we seem to always get into the habit of not caring about the other person anymore. And I think a lot of times it's the breakdown of the family unit. And this actually gets people upset. And, there's not really a lot we can do. Well, I think we've got to start in the elementary schools and discussing how the other person feels. And with the breakdown of family, then you get the rise in gang. And, we've seen this in fashion for years. The whole baggy pant type look seemed to be quite popular. But that could take years. And how are we going to teach our kids nowadays that our fellow human beings matter? That, if a person gets them upset, what are we going to do to ensure that, they don't go out and get a gun, that violence doesn't solve anything? And, I think we can all tie this back to the whole Trumpism and, how he's portrayed as the guns are the answer type. He's the law and order candidate. And I think if he gets in, then we're going to have issues. And a lot of people are saying if he gets in, we're going to end up in World War III. But, we have to ensure that people care about the other person. And, where, according to him, women are out, Mexicans are out, Muslims are out. And I think even in his own party, there seems to be where if you're a white Anglo-Saxon male, you're fine. But if you're not, then all these other, there's so much exclusion. But just as long as the white male seems to be predominantly fine, then, nothing else is worth going at. And I think with the breakdown of families, and there's not an awful lot of people to take over. Fathers, mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, all are important. But a lot of people, when the actual initial family breaks down, there's no one there to pick up the slack. So, the whole gang mentality takes over. And a lot of women and men end up in gangs. And the violence has got to stop. We've got to stop allowing these things to be acceptable. I think we've become so much more desensitized to the violence. And, we're seeing the violence in the States and, people putting up posts. The last time there was shootings, we could think of, 2 years ago in Ottawa with the shooting of the people. They were already starting to say, oh, it's all rigged. It's the gun lobbyists who want you to think But I think we're now getting into the influence. Now, as one of the things we were always taught when I worked with 7-Eleven for years was that if you brought a gun to work because you think that, oh yes, you'll all be safe if you bring a gun. The point is, you're not really going to be safe because people will find out you have a gun. and they will just bring something more violent. So we could end up having, I don't know, the rapid machine guns in the schools, and then there's the rifle lobbyists down in the States that say, well, the only way you're going to be safe is that if you carry a gun. The only thing that will stop a man with a gun is what's the word? A good person with a gun. But, we keep things so relevant that, somebody wants their 15 minutes of fame and they can go out, shooting or stabbing someone. That we've grown up, or the kids nowadays have grown up with this philosophy that violence is acceptable, but they've seen all these people over the years. And I really think we've got to stop doing this, and we've got to stop allowing these things to be happening. Now, when I was in high school, or the beginning years of high school, we'd have a class, and I was only there until the beginning of grade 10, but we would have this class where you would have a guidance class. And, they were talking about, kids are growing up too fast, and, well, that's great, but I think they need to concentrate on this, but dealing with an appropriate measures for these acts of violence, and that they have a chance to talk and come out with solutions. And we need to ensure that there are suitable answers to this. Kids are not always just going to be happy, but they've got to know how to deal with problems. It's something really to think about. Okay, so BC doctors are upset, and we're kind of used to the doctors taking causes under their wings. And this one, it all goes about the government's plan to legalize pot. And personally, the smell of pot, if you go behind us, where in the summer months we'd be out now shooting our vlogs, but you can smell it, and I just never really liked that smell. But people, I keep wanting to call, not decriminalization, but legalization. And that's pretty well why the Trudeau government got elected. But I think we have to really take a look. Now, they said just on the news that Washington and Colorado, which were two U.S. states that are already have gone down this path, kind of, well, things aren't that great. That fatal crashes involving someone who's under the influence has more than doubled. So people associate that, oh God, I'm itchy today. Drinking and driving is bad. We've known this. Kids have grown up with this. Society, we all know that drinking and driving is bad, pure and simple. We need to ensure that they get this message too. If the government's deciding to push the pot envelope and allowing pot to become legalized, then this is going to happen because people don't associate that, okay, drinking, you're under the influence, oh, it's negative. But with pot, it's not, they don't seem to equate that with being intoxicated. And, we've always said, well, you're intoxicated if you're drunk. But people under the influence of drugs should not get behind the wheel of a vehicle. It's pure and simple. Why? If you can't make proper judgments and people, and we start the whole process where people say, oh, well, yes, I drive better when I'm high. I do this better when I'm high. But the thought is, are you really going to want to go to a doctor and have a doctor operate on you when they're high? But that's sort of like the same argument. If the person is high, then what's going to stop them from making a poor judgment? And this is all second nature. They all want to, oh, well, yes, I can function better under this circumstance. I can function better under that. But we need to be more concerned that if we open up pot, and my personal feeling, and this is no one's influence, but it could lead to other drugs, and that we seem to be opening up our society and sending a message to kids that it's okay to be drunk, whatever, however you want to say it, intoxicated, as a normal part of life. And really, what's a matter with people dealing with life as we know it? Getting out there, being active, getting some good old-fashioned air into your lungs, instead of, oh, well, yes, let's all just get intoxicated. We have I think I've said this before in another blog on the same subject, that we've taken care, or we haven't done enough to stop abuse of alcohol. We see a number of family disputes going because people don't know how to handle. There's always going to be some people who like the smell and, getting out, and how much better it would be for our economy, where all this money that was going into the drug dealers, and it will all come back into the government's pockets. But the impacts where people are going to get sick from pot, Lord knows what people will put in, how it'll all be great, and There's a number of people who now roll their own tobacco, and that's been around for years. But what else are they putting in there? You don't know. We keep talking about the fentanyl crisis we have. We don't know what is out there actually in pot, and there will be people who still want to grow their own pot because it's relatively easy to do. And, I think we've got to really step back. We don't want any more people getting killed. And just because you decide that oh yes, I can drive better while under the influence of marijuana. But does this just desensitize? I know I used that word already in the first one, but the next thing will be cocaine. Oh well, yes, studies have shown this, and you can find a study for anything out there, but we need to ensure that. Why don't we get back to just being normal out there? Taking care of everyone is important, and we need to ensure that we don't rush into anything. Now, the government will say, well, right now there's no talk of making, the harder drugs legal. But, a few years ago, there was no talk either. But things change and priorities change, and who knows where we're going to be. I can remember when I went to school, and where I went to school, they had the photography lab overlooking my dorm, or the house. We were broken up into houses. And there was a big breakdown, and somebody was expelled for rolling the drugs and, marijuana and everything, getting ready for school. Now, in the 70s, it was cigarettes. That was the big thing in the schools. There was an area where, when I was in Sherwood Park, they had a place called The Pit. And whoever designed this area, it was a nice, I think you call it parquet floor. And the whole floor was ruined by kids smoking, and if you were put in the area and you had your locker, you were pretty well stuck, and you'd have to go and you'd have to smoke, and if you didn't like smoking, well, that was tough. That was your locker. And right back then, we weren't really that sensitive, that it was acceptable. So yes, it was all done. And just going on the outside of, I think it was called The Pit, it was just ridiculous, the amount of smoke that would come from this area. But I think we've got to stop, and we've got to say, hey, if we're going to do this, we've got to make sure it's done sensibly, and that just because everybody wants to do it does not necessarily mean that it's right for everyone. And I think we've got to really take a look at this and decide how we're going to bring this into the local government and how we can all implement this, because everybody wants it. And I can remember when I was training for 7-Eleven, I had a few people come into the class and, they break for lunch and they come back high. And it was, well, everyone does it. And my response was, not everyone does it. There are people out there who do not like cigarette smoke. I don't like cigarette smoke. I don't like the pot smell. But, where can we go? It's something to think about. Is getting into drugs and alcohol and all that the proper sort of things to implement? And how we go about making sure that in Canada, if we implement this, we're not going to have the same results than for people who are that we've seen from our cousins down to the south in the States that have legalized pot. It's just something really to think about. Okay, so our last little topic was just out of a commercial I saw. And it's pretty well debt and how easy debt can be taken away from you. And I was probably one of the first, or in the first sort of years as high school where you had to have, you had to have a business class. Well, in that business, it was pretty well shown how great credit was. And, it was really to sort of help you get into business after that. Yes, you need the capital, but we keep looking at this and people try saying, well, I've got credit. And the whole thing, and even we don't pay enough for people on welfare or on disability, so that it could open the doors to having people trying to survive on little or nothing. And when they do this, a lot of times they turn to drugs or anything illicit in order to make the money, because that's where the money is. And, I really don't necessarily agree with this. I think we have to maybe invest in our society and people. Just because they're on welfare or they're disabled does not necessarily mean that they're a negative, that they've done something wrong, they've done this wrong, they've done that wrong. But I don't think we've taught our kids, and I don't know if I've got to admit, I've gone through the bankruptcy because I just dug a hole too deep, and then you try to find other ways, and I went down the road of trying to get into the debt services, and I finally had to declare bankruptcy because I had no other road to go with. And, The years I can remember in high school or whatever were the years we didn't talk about credit card debt and what it actually is. I knew that with credit cards that you really got into a higher rate of interest. But I went through many days. I could hardly wait for Friday to come because I knew that now I really got into um, being into debt of my own. But, they're not the only reasons for. People get into debt because A, they've lost their job, B, they're trying to provide for a family, and it seems, well, I can buy groceries. And when I was growing up, you used to not to be able, you didn't, credit cards were not allowed for food. You could go out to a restaurant, but you couldn't go out and buy food. And the whole thinking was that they couldn't come back and get the money for people who were on credit. That, the food was gone. There's not much that you could really go after. And I don't know if they changed the rules or what happened, but we now it's common, and I think it's because prices keep rising. The amount of meat or whatever is astronomical, and we sort of have to take a look and say credit seems to be the answer. You want to rent a car, you have to have a credit card. You want to go somewhere, you have to have a credit card. You check into a hotel, that's the first thing they ask you. Oh, do you have a credit card? And you can't really go there, or you have to share a room with someone who has a credit card. And the whole thing just seems to escalate. And, I think that people need to understand credit more. And getting back to where we are nowadays, where kids need to understand what happens when you actually do take out a loan and how much more of an interest there would be. If you say, oh, yeah, the interest is only going to be 4% compounded, well, what does this really mean? And I think we've got to stop and say, hold on a moment. What are the stipulations? And what can happen if you don't pay up your bills? And how are you going to get in and get solutions for these if you end up not paying your bill? So we need to prepare our kids, but we need to prepare our kids for more legal roads, or giving out what's actually being done and how we protect each other. But, a lot of people have gotten into this trouble, and me included. So, I think I've learned. I think I can be more responsible. But on the other hand, oh well, it's just too easy. It's too easy to get the card. And of course, all these people want you to get the cards because then it increases the amount you spend, and oh, it's great for the economy. But is it that great for our economy? Are we going to end up having to pay off our debts constantly? But I think we really need to be more alert to what's going on out there. And our our kids having the skills that they need. And I don't think there's really that skill set out there. And I think where English, reading, writing, arithmetic, that's where we all started. People keep saying, oh, well, if we get back to that, that'll be great. But I think we have to have like a real talk and letting kids know about what's happened. And there will still be kids that get into trouble with money. Everybody wants everything. And, there's a difference that if you go on welfare, there's always this stipulation, oh well, you can't survive. Well, I really think you probably can survive, but welfare was meant to be a stopgap. You know, I think just over $600 a month to live off. You've got to pay your lighting and a few other things. Sorry, my light went out. But do we really need this? We need to teach our kids what's going to happen if you don't pay up. And, the little things that we keep allowing our kids to grow, but we don't give them the proper tools. And I think that's something we all kind of have to look at. Allowing our kids to grow and to keep things going. So, that's something to think about. Okay, so in conclusion, what do we talk about? We've talked about legalizing pot. We've talked about school kids understanding business a bit more. We've talked about a stabbing out in a school. And, we all kind of take a look at how a number of these topics all kind of converge and all come up with the same sort of topics. And there's always seems to be a thread where one topic, and I just pull these up and just read the story, and then do I have a comment on such? And I think we need to be more aware and see how one story influences another. But, it's something to think about. Have a great day. We'll talk to you later. Bye.